Welcome, Will Jewell, Brighton film director.
Three months, or completion penalties will kick in. Get back to work now.
Who the fuck do you think you're talking to?
Well, it's just that the money to cash flow the material, pay my men, it's 3 weeks overdue now.
He's making a mug of you, Bob.
I'm gonna get it any day, all right? Any day, I promise.
There's just something about him I don't like.
And I want you gone.
There's a decent chance they go bust anyway. Richard, you said this was legitimate.
They're closing the scheme down Thursday. Warrants, dawn raids, the whole shebang.
You guarantee them on Tuesday.
I want that money. I want it now. We heard him on the phone.
What part of that do you not fucking comprehend?
Yeah, you can imagine how we feel.
I'm fascinated this because I've never asked you how did you become a film director?
Very long and winding, meandering route. I was always more kind of art and music, really. And I was playing in lots of bands, thinking I was going to be a rock star, and then sort of realizing I wasn't putting the hours in and wasn't a great musician. But I was writing lots of lyrics, and I got more into the side of writing lyrics. And the lyrics were starting to become like very narrative and sort of almost short stories. So I went and did an evening class at Bogdan in the evening in creative writing, and a guy who took the class ran a production company and used it with a half an eye for new writers. Kind of collared me and said, "You can write. You should write a film." Okay. Pitched him an idea for something about film buffs who watched every heist movie ever to piece together the perfect heist, and they robbed a cinema because they were fighting back against Hollywood. It's all very like, and he said, "Right, you got 6 weeks, go away and write it." And I wrote it, and his company optioned it. So I thought, okay, I'll write then. I'll be a writer. And I then wrote a couple more features that got optioned, and then I got an agent and wrote a bit for doctors and TV. And then got fed up with producers changing things and having my things directed by other directors and then not coming out how I saw in my head. So then moved into directing. So it's been a long trip, really.
That's quite a good bit of advice, though, isn't it? To take people to do classes, not necessarily for what they might learn, even though you obviously benefited, but from who they might meet. Standard networking moment.
It is. I mean, I teach a little bit at Brighton Film School, which is now Screen and Film School, like a day or so a week. And I went to that film school many years ago. But it was more, I didn't learn a huge amount, but it was more about meeting like-minded people. And I met a guy who was a great DP, and we ended up setting up a production company together. So it's totally about that. It's about being in that place where people want to make films. So yeah.
And now you've elevated to the grandiose world of feature films. I watched your new film Concrete Plans on Sky last Wednesday, a week ago or so. And I loved it because I told you that. I was very excited to watch it. It's like, oh, my friend made this up. So how did that come about? Because just to put it into a little bit of context, I was actually a little wary of watching it. What if it's not very good? And also because in the run-up to making it, you said it was a Brexit film. Used the word Brexit, which instantly made me go, oh, is this going to be a bit Ken Loachian dull? No offence to Ken Loach, but it's like I didn't quite know what to expect. And of course, it's not what I was fearing at all. That's a subtext that's of a thriller. But yeah, so how did it come about?
Well, it came about from I'd made a short called Man in Fear, which was about sort of conceptual artists who create accidents as works of art, and about a guy who was played by Luke Treadaway in the short film that suddenly everything around him became an accident. And that was getting a lot of heat about making that as a feature. So in the long route was I got suddenly Altitude, and a lot of the companies were pulling me in going, we want to make the feature of this. But then they ran the numbers and went, oh, hang on, because you've got all these set piece stunts, it costs a certain amount of money and you haven't made a feature before except for a documentary, so we can't get you bonded. Go away and make a low budget feature. So that kind of led me to start thinking about, okay, right, let's make a low budget feature. I was trying to get one off the ground, which was a psychological thriller set in Lewis that I was attached to, which the finale was going to take place against the bonfire parade, which I thought was a very smart production idea. But the producer on that got headhunted to run iFeatures for Creative England. So I thought, well, okay, well, we ought to still put something in for iFeatures. And so I was in a little, apologies, my dog is going mental out in the garden. I was in there was a whole bunch of indie sort of Brighton filmmakers. We were all sharing a little tiny hovel of an office down near the seafront. And iFeatures deadline was coming up, and they only come up every few years. So we're always a bit of a buzz. And there was a producer in there called Rob Alexander, who he'd made a couple of feature docs that had been played at the cinema. So Man Whose Mind Exploded. He just did the Gary Newman one, Android in La La Land. So they'd been TV and feature. So we'd been kind of skirting each other, a lot of mutual friends, sharing an office, thinking, okay, we should work together. So casual conversation, having a coffee about, well, we should put something in for iFeatures. What have you got that's kind of doable on a small budget, which means in filmmaking terms, few locations, small cast. And I'd written a short film based around the portal cabin scene in the middle of this. A group of builders sat around a table playing cards. Something clearly bad had happened. There's blood on the floor. And the whole rationale of it was, why ruin 5 lives? The loser takes the blame. The rest of us get out of here. And it was, would you take that risk? And that moral question. So that was the root of it. Rob said, go and have a think about some ideas you got that could be done on that budget. And I kind of came back and said, okay, I've got this idea. And I wrote a 5-6 page treatment. He took it to Film Wales and they said, we like this, there's something in here. So Rob said, would you shoot it in Wales? I'd been thinking about, it just needed to be somewhere remote. I was thinking about Dartmoor or something like that, because I know Dartmoor because my dad's from down there. But Rob said, let's go and do a recce, drive around Wales. And I'd been to Wales a few times when I was a teenager and saw the mountains there. Went, these are pissed all over Dartmoor. These are so much more cinematic. If they'll give us some funding towards this, hell yeah. And they liked the 5 pages that I'd written, and they said, look, give us a chunk of money, and said, this will tide you over to turn it into a feature. We want you to come to Wales. This will cover you to do a recce, drive around, find some locations, start to attach a few crew, schedule it, budget it, and then come back to us and we'll see, we like the direction it's going.
That was a very strong 5 pages, if all this was from that.
I know. I look back, I found that 5-page document and I was looking at that going, God, this turned into, a significant chunk of money off the back of these 5 pages. And as a writer, you'll know writing treatments is the hardest thing, I think.
If we did them.
You were a small part of the film because you covered my film school classes when I was in Wales doing pre-production.
I do tell everyone it's all down to me, definitely.
Of course it is, yeah.
But that's it. So how quickly did this process take for you to then, start from inception through to filming?
Quick isn't a word I'd really associate with it. When we were on the last day of filming at the wrap party, my producer kind of came up and announced that he'd just been checking his emails, and it was pretty much 5 years to the day since I'd sent him those 5 pages. So so it's a long and winding process. So Film Wales gave us, they liked what they saw when they came back with the first draft, so they gave us another tranche to flesh it out and start to attach a few provisional casts. And they liked they liked the way it was taking, the direction it was taking. We had a couple of casts attached to ultimately they weren't in the film, because by the time you finalise the date, we had to keep kicking the shoot dates back 2 or 3 times because we just didn't have the money. So by the time we'd got the money, and it was touch and go. Even 3-4 months before the film shot, we were around that Christmas thinking we still got a hole in the finance. They changed the rules on one of the funding schemes in Wales, and that kind of lost us a chunk. So I ended up remortgaging the house to plug that gap, and then we sprung another leak, and it's kind of, so getting the money together and getting a cast together, those two are inextricably linked, because if anyone's going to put money in, the first question is, who have you got? Who's in it? Which I found quite eye-opening, because I love working with actors, and for me it's always been about so and so's a great actor. I saw them in this thing and they were amazing. But to producers, it was, you know, the producers and the funders were, well, they don't mean anything. They don't have any monetary value. They don't put bums on seats.
Obviously, I don't mean to say anything disrespectful to your cast, but none of them are like box office names who could carry financing, to my knowledge. Was it more of the ensemble of their credits that helped plug those gaps, or in the end, you just cast who you wanted? And
no, it was tricky because I guess because our budget wasn't huge, it meant I had a good degree of autonomy in terms of who we cast. Not a total free hand, but I mean, we did have a couple of actors who were had some degree of profile, who were originally attached, and they were attached for 2 years. And even though we kept kicking the dates back, but then when we ultimately said we are now definitely shooting on these dates, they couldn't. So we got actors of similar profile, but that had just helped to get some of the money together. I know, you know, they're recognizable when people see the cast, they see the trailer, they're, oh, it's so-and-so, it's them from so-and-so, it's them from this, it's them from that. So they're all kind of quite well known.
Well, I'll tell you who I definitely knew from the off, and that was Steve Speirs.
Yeah,
I've seen him around Brighton for starters.
he lived in Brighton for 18 years. He moved back to Wales actually now, but he's yeah.
I actually thought that's maybe where that connection was that I thought he might be a Brightonian that you knew.
It wasn't, but there's a very strong Brighton connection in the cast. James Lance I knew because I'd worked with him on 2 shorts in Brighton. He lived in Brighton for years. Steve Speirs lives in Brighton for 18 years, and Charlie Palmer Rothwell, who played Steve, the young kid, he's Patsy Palmer's son, and obviously grew up in Brighton as well. That makes you feel old, doesn't it?
It does. Oh my god, it does. Oh, he's his son. Wow. I didn't know Goran, but he was great.
Yeah, I saw him in Last Panthers on HBO, and he just blew me away. He's in Fargo season 3, but it was Last Panthers that I saw. I was just like, he was the lead with John Hurt, Samantha Morton, and Tahir Rahim, and he absolutely, you know, held his own in that company. I'm like, wow. I thought we'll never get him, and when he said yes, and he was just the nicest guy and such a good presence. We shot the film in 15 days, which was nuts, and yeah, Goran was just really positive energy on set, and he was nominated for the best actor in the European Film Awards, and he just lost out to Mads Mikkelsen for another round. He was nominated for Father, another film I have to say, but but he's just a great actor. Yeah. I mean, that whole cast are just it's strange because an ensemble's a tricky beast, and after we saw the film, Steve Speirs messaged me and was going, usually in a film there's a weak link, and I'm looking at the film now, I've seen it finished, and there's no weak link unless it's me. And I assured him it wasn't him. There is no weak. It was almost because we shot so cheap and fast that everyone mucked in. There was no, you know, we tell all their agents, yes, you'll have a green room, and we're like, well, if you really want a green room, we'll turf someone out of their bedroom upstairs, because the manor house we shot in was also the crew base. And so everyone got the food from the same hatch, and everyone just grabbed a chair next to a runner or whoever it was. It doesn't matter if you're the cast. There was absolutely no airs and graces, and I think that kind of that ensemble and that democracy really kind of spurred them all on to kind of, the actors were all, there was all such great actors. No one wanted to be a weak link, and it just made everyone really push. They were all pushing each other, and it's just, universally in the reviews, the performances and the cast kind of get mentioned, and how strong they are and how believable, which I
absolutely loved it. And going back to your original 5 pages, then, if you started off with the thought of the builders in the porter cabin, I got a distinct The Thing vibe from the claustrophobia of that, but I think that may as well have been because of your soundtrack, you know, the electronica, which sounded very, at first it was a little bit, hey, I was quite not confused, that's the wrong word, but I was going, well, this is quite a 70s John Carpenter feel for me. And then with the 5 guys in the porter cabin saying, I'm getting this Thing vibe off you. And of course I didn't know how the drama was going to unfold, other than you'd started off with the close-ups of the blood and the drill. Which, by the way, was it scripted like that, by the way?
It was always scripted that there was some oblique references. Yeah, I was always, I was quite aware that in my early drafts of the script, I was told it was too slow at the beginning, and it was too, it's essentially the first half is a bit Ken Loach, and then it goes off into Shallow Grave and all the rest of it. So I was always thinking, I want people to stick with this, so I need to give them the promise at the beginning.
Yeah.
There's an Australian film called Lantana that I remember thinking that was a really smart move the way they structured it, because it's a 4-person ensemble relationship drama with 2 couples, and there's lots of infidelity, which and it's quite slow moving, but in the very opening scene is going through the undergrowth in the bush, and you see a woman's foot and shoe, and so someone dies, but you don't know who. And so I kind of thought that was really smart, because it kept you on the hook, and it put a flame underneath the film that you kind of watch, knowing you've had the promise that it's gonna go south. And so I thought, that was always in the script, that to give you these oblique little montage at the beginning that things are going to go south. I'm going to start gently, I'm going to ease you in, get to know the characters, but trust me, things will go south. So that was deliberate.
Well, I love the phrase "the promise," because, as you say, you give yourself time to build up, because you've made the promise, so the audience, at some point this is going to get nasty. I was wondering whether it was an editing choice or a scripting choice. You see,
script is that, but the shots we used, our shooting ratio was ludicrously low, because we hardly had more than 1-2 takes on anything, because we were dropping scenes every day, and I was rewriting the script every night, because the whole third act is essentially different to what was scripted. Some character are telling certain actors that their character is now going to die because we have run out of road to shoot probably 5 scenes at the end that they liked. A bit tricky.
Well, going to back my thing, was the thing ever in your thinking? Which one of them?
You're the first person to mention the thing, but as soon as you said it, I can see where you're going. It's that sense of isolation, kind of blue collar guys trapped somewhere, the claustrophobia, the paranoia. I can absolutely see it, but you are the first person to mention the thing. And
it might just be the soundtrack, which I ended up loving, by the way.
That's Paul Hartnoll, which is another Brighton connection. So Paul Hartnoll of Orbital, who scored Peaky Blinders season 2 and had their music used in lots of films, and that was great. In fact, I'm going for a pint with Paul tomorrow, because he's got a film idea he wants to discuss. So I'm intrigued. But no, that was a joy working with Paul.
Trying not to give too much away, but the landowner character, the young man with the money in the house, you made him quite unlikable, which I'm quite interested as a choice. Because obviously, well, I don't know whether this gives it away or not, but gets broken in the process of the film, and that's where the whole drama spirals around his murder, or not. But he's an unlikable character with very few redeeming features, and yet he's the subject of the murder. I was wondering why that was. You didn't give him a heart.
Well, there's a weird thing. There was a couple of subplots around him that gave a bit of context, but the film, when we did a test screening, the first half of the film was really dragging. It was taking too long to get to the punch, essentially the point in the middle that you're talking about of giving away, basically. But so there was more in there. There's allusions to it. If you listen carefully, when they in the card game, they talk about people coming back from war zones messed up in the head. So he's suffering quite badly from PTSD. There was a subplot with that and a few scenes. And there was a whole thing about the family expectation and the weight of pressure on him about this military history, and his sister was on his case, that he dragged the family name through the mud. So there was a lot more context around that character. To
be fair, elements of that do come through.
They're there. They're there.
More of a balance. I'm just saying, but as a whole, he's still a guy you don't mind that much.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was, I must admit, when we did a first cut of the film, people said, look, we're on the side of the builders. And there was always, you alluded earlier to this kind of almost Brexit element, the fact that there's a lot of things stewing in the subtext in the background, and the out of touch elites versus the other. So he was kind of, each of the characters, as well as them being a character, is almost an embodiment of the sides of sort of the period of history that Britain's gone through in the last 5-6 years, because the film's been developed over a long time. But weirdly, when the referendum happened, I looked at the script, and already Victor, one of our lead characters, was this East European migrant labourer who was the Daily Mail hate figure. It was all this fear of outsiders was being stoked. It was rich versus poor, social tensions. So much of that stuff was in the script that I just kind of heightened it. So he probably became more maybe unlikable just for the screen time that we had. So yeah, I do feel bad because I thought that character could have done with slightly more. He did have a bit more rounding out, but we did a test screening and all the feedback was it dragged. We needed to get to that point when things kind of the wheels come off, basically. So yeah, I feel bad that we lost a few elements to that character.
Just whilst I'm on the name checking, I really like Chris Riley as he was great. And Rose Reaver. Again, I didn't know her before the film, but she was great. She was sort of held it. She was a central core, which it kind of revolves around, which I love.
She was in The Punisher on Netflix. She's Indian Summer. I'd seen her in Indian Summer, and then the casting director sent me a reel of her stuff from The Punisher, which I wasn't aware of, and seeing that kind of that tough edge to her that she had in that, where she's FBI agent and really holds her own in that. That really made me think, yeah, she's got all these different elements to her character, and the Amy character needs to almost be a character playing more than one character. So she needed to have that range, and I thought, yeah, she smashed it. And Chris was great. Chris has got a role in the new Guy Ritchie film apparently as well, and he's got a lot coming out. Chris he won a Scottish BAFTA a few years ago for The Last Post, which was the 1950s, I think, Afghanistan or Suez army thing. Chris was great, very, very kind of intuitive, and he brought edges to that character, because straight away, the first thing I was saying to him was I didn't want that character to feel just the stock bad guy. And there were scenes when I was in the edit with David Wigram, my editor, and there was a point when they're talking about the scene, what about the girl, when they're talking about what do we do now, and you can tell none of this sits easy with him. He's the one driving them into this worse and worse spirals of hell. But there's moments, they're talking about now, what do they do about the fiance? That doesn't sit easy with his kind of working class code of conduct about, you don't harm women. And you can see even though he is the antagonist essentially, and he's driving other people and they're falling under his evil spell, there's points of me and David looking to each other going, are we starting to feel kind of slightly sorry for Jim? And it was like Chris just brought that quality to him that, he's got the real everyman quality. So it was very, people said he was very believable as the kind of the bad driving force, because he's, people like that. And that's come up a lot of times. People have said the characters, they're a kind of spectrum of moral values, but people, even the ones who are the less desirable end of the spectrums, people going, people like that. You absolutely in your life have met people like that. So
how big was your crew? I mean, was it a minimal crew?
It was pretty tiny. Yeah. I mean, the budget was tight, and it's 15-day shoot, which was absolutely crazy. I think on the busiest days, we probably had around 50 plus people. That's the crew, the cast. If they're all there in the same time, there's 8 of that is cast. So you can see how small that is in terms of a crew, and that would be on the busiest days where we had a fire. So you have to have 3 people from a fire health and safety standing there doing nothing. And you've always got to have a couple of medics sitting there eating your catering just in case something happens. So your numbers are always inflated just for the safety aspects. So the actual crew themselves were absolutely skeletal. So yeah, there was not a lot of sleeping and a lot of long hours and days. So yeah.
And how did you approach the cinematography? Did you do sort of mood boards or just discuss films you liked?
That was I'd always in my head had more of a spaghetti western feel to a lot of the influence, but the idea that the tropes of sort of these hard-bitten blue-collar guys in the middle of nowhere, upper mountains, a sense of injustice that they're fighting, it all felt. I had this kind of epiphany about a couple of years into it that they were very Western tropes. So I'd always been, I was gorging on a lot of spaghetti westerns, so a lot of my influences were that. But a lot of spaghetti westerns take tripod, and they need a lot of planning. The tripod, they're bigger anamorphic lenses. That you've got to block quite carefully. They're time consuming shots. There's trace elements and flavors of that in there. In terms of the DP, we had Rachel, who was the DP, only came on board about 7 weeks before the film. So my first thing I did is I sent her about 500 images, and I was just like, these are all screen grabs from other films. I respond to them all in different ways, and we just sat there in Picture House Central in London for a day, going through all these images, going, I love that image because this. And through that process of osmosis, we defined what the film was and what the film wasn't. So we absolutely kind of built it from the ground up. And then we kind of almost created sort of style Bibles, because there's 3 principal locations in it. I mean, the lake, we were there for a day, but it's inside the porter cabin, inside the house, and on the building site. So we defined what the color palette for each of those was and what the sort of shooting rules essentially were. And we created everything in the porter cabin should feel dehumanizing. It should feel horrible and artificial or man-made. So it's the yellow strip lights, the greeny blue, nasty curtains. There was nothing warm in there. So we banned any kind of reds or browns or warm colors. Whereas in the manor house, which was this beautiful 500-year-old farmhouse, a lot of my references for that were The Godfather and things like that. So it was yellow practical lights, lots of reds, lots of wood, lots of browns, and everything that felt warm and comforting and luxurious. And then out in the yard was sort of autumnal palette of flinty greys and blues and greens. So we defined the colors, and that kind of Bible went to the gaffer, to the costume, to art department, and we were quite rigid on that because we knew there was times I almost approached it as sort of 3 plays in a way in each of those locations, and the porter cabin scenes were essentially almost written as sort of 1-act plays in that way. And you could see it being quite theatrical. You could have the manor house scenes and the porter cabin scenes and the build up social tension. So I kind of wrote it almost with that idea of it being a play in my head. So in terms of cinematography, that gave us the parameters. And then, to be honest, that porter cabin was so small. There were 2 porter cabins, and one of them was so tiny there were only really 2 shots you could get in there. So our shot palette was fairly limited. And in the bigger one where the card games take place, it's a long narrow tube. So you want to go and chat with your actor and have a word, you've got to squeeze past 6 people, and you got everyone's elbows and armpits in your face. And by the time we wrapped that thing, it stunk and it was hot and horrible and
authentic. I think the word is.
I mean, that's the thing. Everything about that porter cabin, the art direction, was to make it grimy and inhospitable and almost unfit for human habitation. And in fact, we got it from a junkyard. And one of them is still on the farm. I think sheep are in it now. But everything was made to feel, even if it wasn't that grimy to begin with, it was made by the art department to look even grimier. And I think the biggest cheer of the whole shoot was when we finally shot the last scene in that porter cabin. It was just so claustrophobic and tight and horrible and stinky. So that a lot of the cinematography style was essentially, a lot of it was, we were shooting in such tight spaces, a lot of that was dictated by that. But we'd started with a very strong sort of style guide that Rachel and I had sort of defined the parameters and the edges of.
And what was the ratio of women? Because if Rachel's there in a stinky builder's hut, it's not usual to have, females in that environment with the stinky builders. So was there more in the crew to support her through that?
Well, the entire camera crew was female.
Oh, great.
Except for the B cam, with 2 guys were my old graduates from film school in London that were off shooting all the sunrises and sunsets in the Welsh mountains. But the entire camera crew were female. And to be honest, most, I'd say probably, 50-50 or maybe even slightly more in terms of a female split on the crew. A lot of the art department continuity. Sorry, just dropped my pen. It was very female. The second AD, it was a very sort of female heavy, particularly having an entirely female camera crew. It wasn't until the sort of first day of shoot that I thought, I imagine this is not usual, because I know teaching at film schools, there's a lot about the sort of sex split between departments and where they're underrepresented, and the more technical roles and DP and camera in particular was one of them. And I know I've had to take a few people to task for being a bit, there is the cult of the rock star DOP, and it's a bit Charlie Big Potatoes, and it can be a bit of a male world. And so that was quite a nice angle to it, particularly telling a story that it's about builders principally. So that world is very male. So it was quite nice having sort of that female eye behind the lens and the camera crew. Brought a different dimension to it.
How did you work with Rachel? Are you a these are my shots, we're getting my shots kind of a director, or are you a let me talk to the actors, figure out how we should shoot this kind of a director, or a good mix? It was
a tricky one because the schedule was so insane. I would have gone through and I storyboarded a lot of the scenes, because we literally had 6 weeks before I was down in Wales to kind of go through and thrash it out. We would sit there, and a lot of the time we'd spend a day in a pub and we'd sit there and I'd scribble out, well, I've got this for this scene, and then Rachel would show me hers. We go, okay, well, that's pretty much on the same lines. But then once you're on set, a lot of that goes out the window, because you'd block it, and ADs look at the watch going, we're already an hour behind today. And by the time you finish blocking and talking it through, doing a read through with your actors, she's like, okay, we're going to be framing like this. And it's survival and getting through it. There wasn't much time for discussions and on set. So it was break for the line. And every day we still ended up dropping scenes. So yeah, it was tricky. Did you have a good first AD then to keep it moving? No. Did, yeah, G, good Welsh boy, kept things turning. Although it was one of those shoots that it felt like the wheels could fall off at any point, and there was a point when G wrenched his back, so he disappeared for a few days, and then when he came back, he was hobbling around and had his little shooting stick to sit on. Chris Riley, who we talked about earlier, he wrenched his back in one of the scenes, and he was in a really bad way. And then when we did the scene in the middle, that scene, I saw him out the corner of my eye. He was getting himself ramped up into that to go, and he slipped on a bit of gravel and wrenched it again, and he had to go hospital. And he was told by the first doctor, you need to lie down for 3 weeks, and that's it. The film was dead. And then he got a second opinion, and that doctor's like, okay, you've only got a week and a bit to go. You can do that, and then take it easy. But we felt a lot of the time we were flying so close to the wind. I was just that when we got to that last day, I was like, we've got it. I've got a hard drive here that has got the film on it in some form. So yeah, it's tough when you're doing it on a tiny budget and on a nuts schedule. There's so many things that could go wrong at any one point. Was it being edited as you went, or was it all being saved up to a magic surprise for Dave Wigram, the editor? Here's your go away. A bit of both. We had a DIT on set, so I'd see the rushes most nights, and Dave came down for about 2-3 days, which was great, because there was the tricky burial scene. I won't go further than that. I knew the first night we shot that we hadn't got it. We ran out of time, and so it was really useful. Dave was there, and he went through and did an assembly of it and said to me, okay, you need to go back and shoot it. We knew in our heads we need to go back and pick up that, because it was vital. He said, you need this shot, this shot, this shot, this shot, and this shot, and then you've got it. So that was a godsend. Also, actually, I knew Dave, the editor, from being in a script writing group with him originally, and it was very useful that he was there when I was having to basically take an axe to Act 3 and make it work on far less days than it could be shot in. I remember me and him pacing around out in the yard of the farmhouse about 3-4 in the morning when I was having to write the crucial scene that one of our cast now dies, rather than other 5 scenes that were going to happen to him. And it took a few goes to get that scene right that the actor was happy with, and it was really nice to have a fellow writer there to bounce off. And Claire, my scripts editor, she was down for a few days as well, but at different times. So it's just finding someone that, as an ally, to bounce off and like, okay, I've been writing this thing for 5 years, and now I'm having to pull it apart every night on 4 hours sleep. So it was sometimes nice to have someone to bounce off.
Well, I'll reassure you then that having just seen it on Sky, I think it works a treat. I would never have known any of these nightmare scenarios unfolded. It looks like a complete, well thought out work to me. So well done. I mean, I just hope you find the audience. You know?
Well, it got great reviews. It premiered at Fright Fest, and then it was Sky. It got picked up for Sky Premiere, and weirdly, me and my partner sat down to watch Ted Lasso, which I love, on Apple TV a few weeks ago, and next to it on just released this week on Apple TV. We're going, it's my film, and we knew the kind of post in the image so well. We were like, looked at each other, go, it's what? And so, yeah, it's going well, and it's out on Sky Premiere Apple TV, and it released in America about 3-4 weeks ago. So, which is good because I know the distributors were a little bit concerned about the sort of glorious mix of accents that we have from Scottish, Welsh, English, Croatian. But that hasn't come up in any of the reviews in America. So I'm hoping that's, I know when Trainspotting was released in America, it was subtitled.
Yeah.
I noticed on the American DVD there are subtitles, but it seems to be going down well there as well, which is good.
Excellent. It must be a huge relief, and to have produced a film that you're proud of. I assume you're proud of it. It's come out
for all the sort of pain and everything that went into getting the thing made and the craziness of it all. I stand behind it, and I'm pleased with it. I think it's a really good bit of work. So, which is nice, because I mean, if you've gone through all that and you've risked your house and everything, you don't want to then look at something and go, oh God, what if only? But I'm despite the circumstances of getting it made, I'm really pleased with performances and how it looks, and that it hangs together, because that was my biggest worry, that having to be chopping bits out of it every night, that it wouldn't, and that was my biggest relief that it does. Just
to sort of congratulate you on the terms of how we talk to our film students, it's a budget appropriate as well. It's that you've got a limited budget and you've written a tense thriller within those confines with what I know there's a bit of ambition to it. There's a manor house in the desolate wilderness, so there is ambition there, but it is basically your 5-page to start with, where all you need is 5 guys in a room and a problem, and it unfolds from there.
There was another builder the actual idea is sort of held fairly true from that original 5-page script. There was an additional builder. There was more of a character, which was the guy in the manor house. His sister was more of a character, and there was at one point an architect who was the kind of project manager, not Bob the Builder. Bob the Builder, which is we had Bob the Builder gags in there, and Film Wales were going, oh, it might not travel. I was going, I've Googled, Bob the Builder is in every country in the world, but in the end it's like, no, just take it. So yeah, there was a little bit of notes from, because Film Wales were the main sort of backer. They put money into development and then into production, and we got some advanced sales from sales agents, and got a bit of private money and tax breaks, and managed to stitch together this modest budget. But it's it happened, and it's done, and it's out, and I'm very, very pleased by it.
Yeah, excellent. And so just to finish with then, is anything happening? What's your next project? Is there anything you can reveal, or is it all?
Yeah, I'm working on a few things. In fact, one of them I sent you a treatment for.
It's not my place to mention it, though, is it?
Yes. Well, I'm going to read your next script, and there's two. Yeah, the one I sent you is Ultra, which is kind of my elevator pitch. It's Chariots of Fire meets Black Mirror, but everyone looks quite bemused when I say that. It's a sort of what if, in a way, of set in the sort of world of athletics and things, that rather than every Olympics being blighted by the fact there's a doping scandal, there is this underground games where the scientists say, well, let's take the gloves off. How fast can a human run? How high can they jump? Let's just say you can dope them to what extent you want. You can augment them. You can insert microchips. And it's basically this guy who gets drawn into this kind of the ultra games, which, has not beyond the realms of possibility, is that some Russian oligarch decides that this could be a global event, and who wouldn't pay to see real life super people compete. And so he gets sucked. This guy who's on the fringes of the Olympic team gets banned for taking a banned substance, becomes the king of these ultra games, but at what price? That he essentially loses his humanity. So
Sounds like Netflix series to me.
well, let's hope we'll see. And then I mentioned right at the beginning of this the Man in Fear short film, which was destined to be a feature. So kind of neatly bookending this, that now obviously I've gone away and made my low budget feature, which is doing pretty well. It's going back and knocking on some of those doors going, hey, remember me? I've made my low budget feature. I've now got my feature script for Man in Fear. So that's the one about conceptual artists creating accidents as works of art, and someone who gets randomly named as the subject of their next piece, and suddenly everything around him becomes this potential death trap, but no one will believe him. So it's that kind of Kafkaesque Jimmy Stewart everyman kind of dilemma.
Well, thank you, Will, for sharing so much about the production of Concrete Plans and your future plans. I can't wait to see your next one, actually.
Well, it might be a few years, but yeah, I should keep you posted.
Excellent. Well, let's have a beer soon and catch up.
Yeah, for that. Right.
Thanks,
Cool.
Will.
Great stuff.